Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
And welcome back, everyone. A topic that's on the minds of a lot of us. We're dealing with it in many different forms. I'm talking about housing. I'm talking about the availability of affordable housing. And even if you're looking for a home, interest rates are up. There's not a lot of inventory. The price of homes has skyrocketed in the last couple of years. We're going to tackle that, look at neighborhoods as well, with somebody who has on his radar the ethics behind this and so much more. He's served as an adjunct professor within business ethics. He's also done a lot of research in that territory, and he brings a wealth of insight. Ronald Berenbeim is back with us here on the program. Welcome back. How you doing today?
I'm doing fine. As you can see, I'm at home. And as you correctly noted, the last few podcasts have focused on sort of community type issues and things that disrupt communities or make communities make or break, like cell phones, labor unions, school systems, libraries, school reading lists, and now talk a little bit about trying to tie that all together in some kind of sense of what people used to call home and the basic unit of home, which is the house. And before we get into that discussion, allow me time for some personal reflection that I think is highly relevant on how we got here and where we go from here. In the 1920s and well into the 50s, a period when T.S. Eliot and Robert Frost were at the peak of their careers, one of America's most popular poets was Edgar A. Guest, who wrote a poem, if you could call it that, entitled, "It Takes a Heap o' Livin' to Make a House a Home." Verse of that caliber threw the critic Dorothy Parker into such paroxysms of anger that she said, "I'd rather fail my Wasserman test than read a poem by Edgar A. Guest." Still, Guest had an important insight. Not all houses were homes, and it is hard to imagine a house without a home. As the 1920s ended, the shadow of the Great Depression lengthened. People lost their houses. They migrated to other cities in which they hoped to find work, houses, and homes, or as we might call them today, communities. At this point, a bit of personal reflection may be relevant. I grew up in post-World War II Denver. Huge tracts of vacant land were almost instantly transformed into neighborhoods. Give you an example. My sister's first house, as a married lady, stood on land where I had ridden horses less than 15 years earlier. You did not have to move to attend a new school. They came to you. On 2 occasions, a new school was built nearer to our house, and I had to go to it. A opportunity that I didn't necessarily welcome. When I was 8 years old, our family began a year-long project of building a new house in a new neighborhood. Well, it was a new neighborhood, sort of. It was a little more than a mile away. And of course, I was now required to go to a different school. 3 or 4 months before the house was scheduled for completion, and this nearly didn't happen because 3 or 4 months before the house was scheduled for completion, a plane from a nearby Air Force training base crashed into a house a block and a half from our housing site, and the house and the house was destroyed. The pilot was killed. Life went on. Later, the Air Force base that I am talking about was converted into a housing development, to give you an idea. what is the difference between those days of optimism and this year of unbridled anger? Government action, the GI Bill, college and a home of one's own were now within reach. After a war with many casualties, more space and a path to prosperity now seemed open to all, or nearly all. And if these improved circumstances were not a reward, they were at least a consolation. And just to give you some details on the housing bill and its breadth, which was, and certainly its depth, which was every bit as important historically as the New Deal, some would say more so. 15.7 men and women too, were eligible for the GI Bill. It had three components. It had education, it had loans to buy a house or to start a business, and it also had money for education. And it's in the latter component, for example, that, you could compile a virtual Hall of Fame for the next 40 years of the people who benefited from that. To cite just one example was the Chief Justice of the United States preceding this one, William Rehnquist. So about 80% took advantage of at least one of these three components. That would be about $12.4 million. So compare that, for example, today. Today we live in the aftermath of a catastrophe in terms of deaths, almost equivalent, if not exceeding it, the pandemic, to World War II. And without acknowledging it, a university education can result in a lifetime of debt, lifetime of debt. In New York City, where I live, private schools can cost $60,000 a year. 40 years ago, when my daughter enrolled in one of those schools, I noted that her first year of kindergarten cost about the same as 4 years of tuition at the Ivy League school that I attended. That knocked my socks off, and it meant that I had to smoke fewer cigars each day, among other things. Hardship. As for housing, in some communities, renting is often more common than ownership, but rentals are often difficult to find, and they can be very expensive too. By the way, of course, I think most people will know that through much of the world, including many European countries, I think the UK, France, Belgium, more people rent than buy houses. So out of reach in any event. Moreover, as for buying, high interest rates and property tax are putting available opportunities, if there are any, out of reach. In any event, there is not much incentive for people who have benefited from housing appreciation to sell. They will have to pay commissions coming and going, possibly capital gains tax, and they could wind up in a smaller, less attractive place with little or no gain. So that's the situation sort of with housing. Now, the other component of this in terms of managing the situation are local newspapers. It is through them that we create a forum for issues, a sense of public and community responsibility, and so on. The situation there is, to say the least, not good. The Medill School of Journalism, Joseph Medill School of Journalism in Evanston, Illinois, that's really northwestern, they conduct periodic surveys. The most recent was 2023, and they found that something like 2.5 newspapers per week, 2.5 newspapers per week were going out of business. That's got to stop, and it will, because before long they'll be all of them out of business. And we find that increasingly the political agenda is formulated by a few large networks from which give most people little or no information about current conditions. You have, I'm sure, heard, and maybe as a newsman, you've even, done some research or knowledgeable in the area. But the Biden infrastructure projects, bipartisan, well, just remember that the targets in many of these communities are led by officials who are unpaid volunteers. They have no staff, or their staffs are volunteers too. And so their access to information is very limited. And that's something that a local newspaper might help them with, saying, hey, there's a chip factory they're going to build that needs a workforce of X, and these are our demographics, and these are the training and the resources we have here. This would be an ideal project for us to apply to. So apply for it. So how does that locally elected volunteer mayor or chairman of the county council find the necessary staff to apply for a grant, which might be 400 pages long? Edgar R. Guest, where are you now that we need you? So it takes a heap of people to apply for one of those grants. A newspaper might help, a local newspaper. In the meantime, discussion of these issues is sort of on the national level, and increasingly based on abstractions as to whether government spending is good or not, whether deficits are bad or good, and all of this kind of stuff, and not, how it's going to help Alamosa or Lamar or small towns near the city where I grew up. So we have an increasingly vitriolic, toxic political environment, which has, to its credit, been addressed by bipartisan majorities in Congress, at least for that particular bill. But the national discussion, the national conversation is on an abstract and vitriolic level. So that's where we are. Are you happy?
All we hear, and I'm not that far away from you. I'm on Long Island, New York, about an hour and change away from where you are. What resonates here is the cost of rentals and how they're continuing to build apartment buildings. But the minimum rent in these buildings, minimum, no exaggeration. This is not in a busy area. This is just a basic place. Call it maybe 2 or 3 bedrooms, is $3,500 minimum a month, $4,000. and upwards there. How are people affording this?
Well, I'll tell you how those few who can, to a significant degree, and you know this, uh, are affording it. They're cutting back on everything else. They're not going to restaurants. They're not going to theaters. They're not going on vacations because they can't afford it. They can barely afford that rent. And what kind of choice do they have?
Yeah, because the foundation is a foundation, someplace to live. And the other part of it is there's one company on Long Island, call it two, but one's much bigger than the other one, that has swallowed up all of the apartment complexes. And now they have the monopoly on the price of rent. And they know, they even freely tell you, well, you can go someplace else, but that's ours too. And this is what it's going to cost. And the rents just increasingly go up every year. Typically, I hear like $75 a month. I'm sorry. Yeah, $75 a month. Um, it's mind blowing how people can afford it or barely make ends meet. I mean, you're talking, $40,000 a year in rent. That doesn't include utilities, and typically that's two bedrooms, sometimes three, depending on where you are.
Yep, yep, yep.
Mm.
Well, that's not bad, actually. I live in Manhattan. Truth to tell, full disclosure, uh, I am a landlord. I charge the kind of rents that you are talking about for the garden apartment. They have a garden. They have about 900 square feet. They've been with us for over 20 years, so they're probably paying less than most people do.
Mm.
It's still the kind of sum you're talking about. And between property tax and estimated taxes and everything else, uh, I don't have the easiest time in the world
Sure.
making ends meet. So,
But at least there's the value there is that apartment, and albeit smaller than the ones I'm referring to on Long Island, you're in New York City. So you're a hop on a, subway. You're where you need to be. Where on Long Island, you got a train station nearby if you happen to work in the city, um, which is an hour and 20-minute ride, hour and 15-minute ride. Um, it's recent, and I feel that it's been jacked up because there's no inventory. Even if you wanted to buy a house, there's very few available. And the ones that are
exactly.
available, now the price is inflated, supply and demand. And now you add, 6.99% interest rate, and look what you got. You got a question mark how people, middle class
Well,
can afford.
bear in mind that uh, it's inflated. I mean, I wouldn't say inflated. It's higher than it used to be, quite a bit,
Yeah.
dramatically higher. That is because the person you're buying it from will have to find someplace else to live.
Well, sure.
And wherever they go, they will have to probably pay a higher interest rate for any money they're borrowing. And they will have to buy something else, the price of which will also be inflated. So don't
Hmm.
blame it all on them. If it's a, if it's a single, if it's owned by a corporation, all bets are off. I don't know what they're.
Well, yeah, I mean the apartment buildings,
Yeah.
that's that. Individual selling. And it seems, even from real estate friends I talk with, that a lot of people are just jacking the price up, putting it up for sale, seeing what they get. If somebody actually snaps at this higher price, then I guess we're moving.
Yeah, then they can afford to move, they can look around,
Yeah.
they can buy some place on some
How did
island.
this, Ronald, how did this happen? How did the price, since COVID go way up?
Well, I think a couple of things. One is that you didn't have to go to work. You could do that at home. So if you could do it at home, then house became both your office and your house. So that helped. And another thing is we're talking about aggregate cost. Interest rates just went way up during that period without anybody so much as sneezing, You didn't
Sure.
need a pandemic for that. And so I think those two things were important. Also, I have to say, as someone who, I mean, growing up, we had nice cars. They usually cost somewhere between $2,000 and $3,000 a year, or $2,000 or $3,000 each time we bought one, which was every several years. Many people bought one every year, just change year by year. And I had not paid any attention to the automobile market. But cars cost you $50,000 now. If you want an electric vehicle, it might
Sure.
even be more. So,
And the current trend is people are holding on to their cars for 12 years or more just because of cost and affording and paying $4,000 a month in rent.
yeah,
It's not digging into politics here at all. I just look at all of this and it's just wow, what has happened? And now we take a look at local stores. They're gone. And to your point before, many of them are gone. That people aren't going out. They're not spending, for restaurants so much and all this other things that normally somebody might be spending because they have to put it into their housing costs. So now you have everything crumbling around you in terms of local business.
that's right.
Mm,
That's right. And, or whenever I get a kick out of these polls where people, when asked, what do you think the most important issue will be? And, they think it might be abortion. And yes, it is for some people. It might be Ukraine. It might be Israel. It might be any number of things. But most people say the economy.
mm,
Now, what do they mean by that? I think they mean what I call the bagel test, which is that since there's a bagel store a couple blocks away from us, and I go there at least once a week, usually more often than that. And since COVID began, I think the bagel price has gone up from about $1.15 to $1.85. And when they say the economy, they mean how much more I'm paying than I used to pay. They don't mean interest rates. They don't mean world trade. They don't mean balance of payments or balance of budget, balancing the budget. They mean that. And
yeah.
they aren't interested in policy. They don't understand it. It's just, they just want to vote for someone whose judgment they trust on that subject.
Food is another topic that we sort of with the bagel. We could go on with the price of
Well,
food right now, the price of
eggs
meat.
were the biggest. I don't like eggs, so I was lucky about that. But eggs, I think, were the biggest.
Yeah, yeah, that and meat. That and meat.
Meat,
Uh,
yeah.
we're out of time here. Great talking with you on this. It is truly trending in terms of exposure and the economy. It really is. And to your point here, back to the beginning, it takes a heap of living to make a house a home. There's a lot going into that, and stretching our lives even more. So I appreciate all of your viewpoints on that today, Ronald.
Next time I might start this talk with T.S. Eliot, and that'll be even worse.
You think about that.
Okay.
All right. Thanks so much. We'll talk soon.
Bye-bye.
We'll be right back.
Are you looking for even more of the podcasts and hosts that you love? The Podcast Business News Network is proud to announce that you now have even more ways to listen live. Check out the MyTuner Radio, online radio box, and Simple Radio apps on iOS and Android, or find us online. Search for Business News Network on mytuner-radio.com, or search Podcast Business News Network on streama.com and onlineradiobox.com/US. Take your podcast on the go and don't miss a minute of the action.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
For nearly 2,000 severely injured veterans, everyday life has become filled with barriers.
Day-to-day simple tasks can become pretty daunting.
I have to carry my chair up 2 flights of steps or have somebody do it for me.
What scares me the most is just the falling.
When I'm struggling with my house, I think, to have that one great barrier just knocked down, it's crucial.
Home for Our Troops is a wonderful nonprofit that builds a
Mortgage-free, fully adaptive, handicap-accessible house. And there's no catch.
It'll be our very first home that we've ever owned.
This is a game changer.
This is where your life begins again.
We need you to join us in completing this important mission. Please visit hfotusa.org and help build homes and rebuild lives.
Because of you, everything's going to be okay.